I'm Jen Capetto. I'm the manager of the Landmark Preservation Program. I'm joined here by Kara Hahn, who's principal planner. And we're going to talk with you about landmark demolition review today. So first of all, why does Landmark review demolitions throughout the city? So mainly it's to provide public notification of the demolition of any building of significance, potential significance. The goal is to potentially prevent the loss of historically, architecturally, or culturally significant buildings in the city. What triggers landmark demolition review is when someone submits a total demolition application to the building department and to us. So it's for a complete demolition of a building or demolition of 40% or more of an exterior wall area of a building. So for example, if in this building, if they were keeping the portion of the building that is standing, then that would be considered, that would trigger landmark demolition review. If they're totally demolishing it, then that would also trigger our review. We also review accessory structures of 1.5 stories or taller if they are outside of historic districts. And then properties that are in a historic district or an individual landmark site, whether it is a primary structure or a secondary structure, always gets landmark demolition review. So first I'm going to talk about that. Demolitions in historic districts and individual landmark sites. So buildings in historic districts and individual landmarks are categorized into contributing buildings, which contribute to the significance for which the district or site was designated, or non-contributing buildings, which do not contribute to the significance of that site or that district. For contributing buildings, we highly discourage the demolition of contributing structures. Any demolition of a contributing structure or a portion of a contributing structure would require a public hearing at the Landmark Preservation Commission. Demolition of non-contributing buildings are not discouraged if they are not contributing to the district and don't provide anything significant to the district. Then we do not discourage demolition, but we do require that the Landmark Preservation Commission review that demolition as part of their design review work. However, demolition approval is always conditional upon the approval of a replacement plan when it's in a historic district. So if you have a building that is non-contributing to a district and you demolish it, you cannot demolish that building until you also get the Landmark Preservation Commission or staff approval for a replacement structure. And that is to ensure that we don't have just empty lots within our historic districts if a development falls through. And then finally, demolition of accessory structures in historic districts or individual landmarks may require LPC review. For example, if you have a carriage house that's fairly significant, that would require Landmark Preservation Commission review of the demolition. But if you have a garage in a historic district that was built in the 1980s or something like that, then perhaps that would not be found to be significant and we could approve that at staff level. So that one's a little bit of an asterisk. The majority of the work that we do for demolition review is reviewing demolition citywide. We review all buildings citywide except for accessory structures under 1.5 stories. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. That's the focus of our webinar today. So what is it? Why is it that Landmark reviews these, and what are we looking for? What's the review criteria? We are looking to see if a property has potential to be an individual landmark. So all of these structures, for example, had potential to be individual landmarks, and that is why we look for these. But most of the buildings do not have potential to be individual landmarks, and so they are generally reviewed and approved for demolition. One can apply for demolition through just a general demolition application. Those are typically done when someone is applying for demolition that would happen in the near future. The homeowner can apply for that, or the contractor can apply for that, or an architect or other professional can apply for that. We do not charge a fee for landmark preservation review of this demolition, and we have 10 business days to review that demolition once a complete application is received. Once we do approve the demolition, the approval is good for 3 years. I know that the building department permits for demolition are much shorter than that, but our landmark approval for demolition is 3 years. And then finally, approval may be transferred to an owner. So it carries with the site up to 3 years and can be transitioned to a new owner should ownership change. There's also the certificate of demolition eligibility process. So it's very similar to our demolition review process, but this CDE application allows certainty in the due diligence phase of a development project. So if you are, if an owner is looking to do a large development or that doesn't entail reuse of the existing building, they may apply for a certificate of demolition eligibility. It used to be called a certificate of demolition or certificate of non-historic status. So if you hear people talking about either of those, they are actually the same thing. We changed the name of it because it made more sense. It was more logical to call it a certificate of demolition eligibility than a non-historic status. Only the owner may apply for this certificate. So a contractor can't apply, or a potential buyer may not apply. The owner has to apply for this. And there is a $250 fee for our review of it. Again, like a demolition application, we review the certificate of demolition eligibility within 10 business days. And that is once we receive a complete application, including the fee. And then once approved, the certificate is valid for 5 years. To provide a little bit of longer certainty. Again, the certificate may be transferred to a new owner, so it carries with the site, not with the owner. When we review demolition or certificate of demolition applications, we're looking to see several things. So if you're planning to submit one of these, we're looking for the owner's contact information. We need to know if the owner information on the application matches the owner information on the real property records. And we need to know that we need an email address for that owner. We are also asked for real property records that show the current owner. And if the current owner is not the same person as is on the real property record, we ask you, excuse me, to submit information that shows the transfer of ownership, because sometimes it takes a few days or a few weeks for the city ownership assessor records to actually catch up with transactions. We're looking for the address, the legal description, and the schedule number for the property, and the date of construction as well. And then we would like photographs of the building, all sides of the building. So if it is a row house structure and there's only the front and the back, then that we ask for 2 photos. But we ask for all visible photo sides of the building. We ask that those images do not be embedded in an email. So sometimes if you're using a phone to submit it, it will embed the photograph, and we ask that those be attached because it's very difficult for us to retrieve the embedded images and save them for our records. It's also incredibly difficult for us to receive links. We ask not to receive links to Google Documents or things like that, because those often will crash our system because of security protocols. The photographs need to be a minimum of 300 DPI, at least 4 by 6 inches generally, and clear and in focus. And please don't shoot them when it's the sun is in your eyes and we can't actually see what you're taking a picture of. For a certificate of demolition eligibility, we ask that there is a signature of the owner or the person legally authorized to sign on behalf of the owner. So if the ownership is a LLC, for example, then we need someone who can actually be authorized to sign for it. And then there's that $250 fee. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kara. We'll talk about our review of the process.
Thank you. That was a good overview. So once we receive a complete application, Landmark staff performs a review. We do the same review for a demo or a certificate of demolition eligibility. Our review on our end is going to be basically the same. So we verify it has a complete application, and then it's assigned to a particular staff member. We all follow the same review procedures. On the right is the first page of our research checklist that we all go through the same standard review process and then an assessment of the property. When we do that research, we look at both primary and secondary sources. So primary sources are sources that were contemporary at the time of construction or at the time that someone was occupying the building. So we look at historic maps and photographs. We look at assessor records, census data, city directories, which were sort of the version of what we would call a phone book, which I guess don't really exist either, but they were the version of the phone book in the 1880s through the 1950s. We look at permit records, we'll look at newspaper records, obituaries. In this case, this is a draft card that you're seeing here for a property I recently researched. We'll look at marriage and divorce records, and we'll look at oral histories and a variety of other primary sources, but this is the main data that we look at. We also look at what are called secondary sources, which are sources where something has been written about something. So you're looking at books that have been written, articles that have been written, historic contexts. There are often architect biographies that we'll look at that History Colorado has compiled, as well as Discover Denver, which is a survey program that is run in a joint partnership between the city of Denver and Landmark and Historic Denver, which is the local nonprofit. We are going through the process of surveying every building in Denver. So if the property has already been surveyed, we will take a look at that. So we go through a pretty rigorous review process of every property that comes in for demolition review. And what we're looking for, as Jen said, is whether the property or the structure has the potential to be a landmark designated property. And we look on it based on the Landmark Preservation Ordinance requirements for what is required to be a Denver landmark. So we look at whether the property maintains its integrity, which we'll talk about a little bit later, whether it's 30 years of age or is of exceptional significance, and then whether the structure meets at least 3 out of 10 of our criteria, which we'll look at now. So in order for a property to be designated, it needs to meet 3 out of 10 criteria. And if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, you can see history, architecture, geography, and culture. Those are sort of areas of significance, and then there's particular criteria that are associated with that. A property would need to meet 3 out of 10 to have the potential to be a Denver landmark. So we look at, based on the history, based on the research that we've done, is a property directly associated with a significant event or the historic development of the city? Is it associated with a recognized person or groups of persons? Is it architecturally significant as an architectural style or type? Is it the work of a recognized architect or a master builder? Or does it contain significant innovation or technical achievements? This is a pretty rarely used criteria, but you might think of the conservatory at the Botanic Gardens as a really innovative building, a technical achievement to get the poured concrete. So there's very few buildings that would meet that. We look at if it's a geographically prominent building in Denver. Is it something that everyone knows about? Is it an established and familiar feature of your neighborhood? Does it have distinctive physical characteristics, or is it a really rare resource? And then we recently updated our landmark designation criteria in 2019 to look at and to include cultural significance. So is the property important to the culture and heritage of a community and allows for an understanding of how the site was used by past generations? Is the property or site a source of pride or cultural understanding? And then finally, is it associated with social movements, institutions that have contributed to the culture of a neighborhood? Oftentimes you can think of civil rights sites for that particular criteria. And so if we find that a property has the potential to meet 3 out of that 10 criteria, we look at, does it have integrity? And it's not structural integrity, it's not the condition of the building. It's basically, would prior residents recognize that property today? And so as you see here, we have 2 different properties that are shown in the black and white photo and the current photo. And you can see they look basically the same, that someone would recognize this as this looks like it used to look. And so that's what one of the things that we consider is during the time period for which the building would be significant, does it still look like that? And so that's so the 2 main things that we look at, does it meet 3 out of 10 criteria, and does it have integrity? So if after we've done our review, we follow the checklist and we find that it does not have the potential to be an individual landmark for a demolition that comes in, if it's approved, we will send an email, and so you'll get a landmark approval number that is required then to go pull a permit for a demolition permit. If it's a certificate of demolition eligibility, we will email you the certificate. The certificate, as Jen said, is valid for 5 years. And it runs with the property, not with the property owner. So if the property is sold and then they decide to demolish the building, you would submit a demolition application to Landmark. And then we won't re-review it. We will just see, yes, you have a certificate. We'll make sure that the certificate and the property you're coming in for a demolition match, and then we will issue the approval number with no further Landmark review. If the individual who is researching the property finds that there's likely potential for an individual Landmark designation, that individual will take it to all of Landmark staff, and it will be reviewed by Landmark staff. So there's always a consistency in all of the review that we do. If it's determined that it has the potential to be an individual landmark, the property will be publicly noticed, and we'll provide that information to the property owner, and it will put a hold on the demolition of the CDE for 21 days. And during that time period, it is publicly posted, which means we post signage on the property, we list it on our website, and then we provide email notifications. Those go to the district council member, the 2 at-large council members, to the registered neighborhood organizations, which, if people aren't familiar with RNOs, they're just neighborhood associations within 200 feet. And then we will also send it to the preservation partners. So it will be History Colorado, the National Trust, Colorado Preservation Inc., and Historic Denver will also be notified. The purpose of that is that designations within Denver are a community-driven process. And so when we post a property, we as preservation professionals have said that we find that this has the potential to be a Denver landmark. And we are notifying the community this potentially significant building may be coming down for demolition. And it's then a community-driven process to decide if they feel like this is important enough to have a discussion about. Should we talk about, is this building so significant to Denver that we should continue the conversation with that? One of my colleagues has said that it's a little bit of a gut check for the community to say, how important is this building? And if so, they can file a notice of intent. It can be filed by the manager of community planning and development. It could be filed by a member of city council or by 3 residents of Denver. And what that does is it extends the hold from 21 days to 60 days to allow for dialogue between the community and the developer or the property owner. And that's done through a third-party facilitated stakeholder meeting. So the city has paid for a facilitator, and he will meet with the owner or the developer, with the community members, whoever has filed the notice of intent, with city staff. And through that meeting or meetings, to determine whether or not there is potential for some sort of compromise and explore a possible win-win situation where property could be saved and the developer would receive the money, the value of the land. If there is no compromise reached, 3 residents of Denver can submit a designation application that would require an $875 fee, and then would go forward before the Landmark Preservation Commission and then possibly to City Council. City Council provides the final approval or denial of a designation application. If after 60 days, no compromise is reached, but no designation application is submitted, Landmark issues an approval, whether it's the landmark approval number or the certificate. And at that point, Landmark has no purview over the replacement plan for the site. And I'm going to switch over to Jen here.
So what we want to let you know about, that all sounds like a very complicated process, but it's an extremely rare process. So we have here's a slide showing some all of our demolition reviews and certificate of demolition reviews over the last 6 years. And you can see that most of the projects in green here are approved by Landmark staff within 10 business days. Some of them get posted for 21 days, and those are the ones in blue. And it's usually about anywhere from 3 to 5% of the applications we receive rise to the level of potential for landmark significance. And then even rarer yet are when we do receive designation applications. So those are the numbers in in orange, and as you can see, they don't even show up on the bar chart because it's they're so minimal. What we did is we took out the numbers of demolition applications that are within historic districts and those that were withdrawn, so that this is really just the ones that have gone through our demolition review process from start to finish. As Kara mentioned, we updated our ordinance in 2019, and that allowed the facilitated stakeholder meeting process. So here's some statistics on the demolition and CDE applications that we received since the demolition or the ordinance was updated in November of 2019 to the end of last month. So of the applications we received, we posted notice for 21 days on just over 3% of those properties. Most of them did not fall into the category of having potential to be landmarks. So the ones in blue are the ones that we posted, and the ones, here's a blow up of the ones in blue, the 35 that we did post notice on. So of those, 23 were approved for demolition. And that is of the total number of applications we received. That's about 2% of them that we approved for demolition after the 21-day posting period. There was a compromise reached on 9 of them during that facilitated stakeholder process, and that is about 0.8% of the total number of applications we received. For designations, we received 3 of them, and 2 of them had compromises that were reached before they got to City Council. 1 of them went to City Council and was not approved by City Council. So as you can see, this is an extremely rare process, and the goal of this is really to have that facilitated stakeholder meeting that will reach some sort of compromise that will achieve benefits for both the property owner and the community at large. So Kara's going to talk about some of these success stories that we have here.
Yes, so there are a few success stories of the properties that have gone through this process. A lot of people have heard about Tomsteiner, that it was proposed for demolition. Through sort of a compromise situation, the property owner, Tomsteiner, received the value for the land, and then the property was listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is proposed for a repurpose where the building itself would be retained. I believe COVID has thrown a little bit of a kink into the time period of that. So if you go by and see it boarded up, it is still a preserved a building that will be reused. It's not designated for a Denver landmark, but it will be reused. And I believe they're going to be taking advantage of tax credits in order to rehab the building. The Ghost Rose House, this is a property that is across the street from City Park. It went through at that time, certificate of non-historic status, now known as a certificate of demolition eligibility. And through the time period where the property was posted, there was the ability to find a preservation-minded buyer. He purchased the property. There was a lot split, and so part of the property was developed, but he has purchased this property, and he is in the process of, he's been rehabbing it, and the building is now preserved and designated, and he can take advantage of tax credits for this property. The Howard Berkeley Chapel, which is near Tennyson Street, around that area. This came in for demolition. We found that it had the potential, and it was an out-of-state owner. It was then kind of through this process and through a discussion process. Again, a preservation-minded buyer has purchased the property and is in the process of reusing it. They have designated the property, and it is now hosting different, I believe there's a church and a school that's going to be going into it.
Yeah, there's a Montessori school, preschool, and a church uses the chapel. And I think there's a restaurant and bar that is proposed for the backside, which was the more delivery area and service area.
And then finally, this is a more recent property. It was proposed for demolition through the facilitated stakeholder meeting process. It was determined that this was a really significant building. A preservation-minded buyer has actually bought it and now is going through the process of rehabilitating the building and has submitted a draft designation application to our office that we are processing right now. So there are some, this is the goal, is to like see, can we find that win-win situation? Sometimes they're designated, sometimes they're not. We wanted to know if any of you have any questions. Here are the ways that you can reach out to us on our website, through our email, phone, and then our Instagram.